This is Criteria.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras. My co-host James Majewski is here. He's here, but I'm just going to make him wait in the green room for a minute because I can do that. If he was here in the room with me, then I couldn't dominate him like this. But because he's away, he cedes control because I edit this podcast as well. So even if he says something now, I can just edit it out. And so here we are. It's nice and peaceful and quiet with you, just you and me, listener. And here's the deal. There's a lot of complicated setup today. James is in California with the in-laws, so that's why we're not together. And here's the thing, though. So we're almost done with the Vatican film list. We only have one film left on the Vatican film list. But we thought it would be lame after these 3 years if James and I recorded that episode remotely. We want to be in the same room to do our final Vatican film list film. So today we decided to put that off by one, and we're going to do a different film. And since it's Easter season, we're going to do an Easter season appropriate film. And that's what we're going to be doing. But let me just dignify my co-host here. James, how you doing out there in California?
I couldn't breathe in there. You didn't leave any holes in the green room. I couldn't breathe. Oh my. Dude, I'm doing really well. Yeah, California, as it turns out, is still beautiful. Still, I even when it's cold, it's springtime, so it's like cold with air quotes. I'm still swimming in the pool, man. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's great. Can we introduce our guest as a Criteria super fan? Can we do that?
Yeah, well, I was going to say friend of the show.
No, I think super fan.
You prefer super fan? He's never sent us a super chat with money on YouTube, so yeah, well, so friend of the show. So today we're here. Here's the thing. We're doing The Miracle Maker. This is a mostly stop motion animated film based on the gospel. I got hip to it because Stephen Gradanis has really flogged this film hard. That's in the good sense of the word flog over the years. And it seemed like a good movie to do for Easter. And so we're having a returning guest today who is an animator, a director. He's been on the podcast twice before. And he's basically our animation correspondent because this is only the second animated film we've done. The first was Fantasia. And this is really within his wheelhouse because he directed an Oscar-nominated short film that was a stop-motion animated film called Head Over Heels. Timothy Reckart. Welcome back to the show, Tim.
Hey, thanks for having me again. And it's fair to say I'm a super fan. I over the past month and a half, I've been doing some storyboard work, which has left me a lot of open ear time, and so I've filled it listening to both Criterion and the Criteria. What's the name of this podcast?
Some super fan
Criteria.
You are.
And also the other Catholic culture podcast that's just about Catholic culture generally. But I've listened to almost all of it, I think.
I just got tagged by a podcast listener on Instagram, which I think is a first, and he called it the Catholic Film Podcast : Criteria, whereas this is Criteria, the Catholic Film Podcast. But I'm not saying that to complain at him because I'm very happy that he is listening to it. He said he was saying that he was about to watch The Passion of Joan of Arc after listening to our episode on that film. So that was gratifying. But, so James, you're away from home recording in California. Tim, you live in California.
Right.
But you are recording away from home in Vancouver. And it would only be completed if we had Nathan Douglas on, also recording, who lives in Vancouver, also recording away from home in Mobile, Alabama, or however you pronounce it, or somewhere,
Right.
So you're both actually away from home. You're in Vancouver, and now it's because your wife is a cinematographer and she's got a gig.
That's
So
right.
let me ask, can you say what she's working on?
I probably could, but it wouldn't be meaningful yet. Let's wait and see what happens. But it's just a independent feature right here, that the kind of romantic comedy, and we both work in film. It was kind of a conversation we had early on as we were courting and talking about marriage. Like, we both wanted to have careers in the film industry and wanted each other to have careers in the film industry, but we also wanted to put our family first and figure out how to do both at the same time and not make it either or, and not certainly not sacrifice the family for the career. And one of the principles we landed on reading and listening to things was just like, as much as possible, wouldn't it be great if we could just bring the family along and make them part of our life in film? And so we have been trying, and so far that this is actually the second feature we've made a road trip out of. But it's just like we're an on location family. So I'm out here with 3 kids at an Airbnb while Hannah is prepping for the film.
So are you actually hanging out at all on the set or anything, or?
No, I'm not. I'm just kind of on Mr. Mom, although my mother-in-law is out here too, and
Cool.
And so she's helping. That's awesome. But no, I think I'm just gonna hopefully take the time here to enjoy Vancouver because I've heard great things and it's my first time.
Oh, dude, I just spent a day. I spent 1 day there last April because I was working on a cruise ship, and that's when I first got to meet Nathan in person. And yeah, it is beautiful. There's like mountains all around the city. I didn't get outside of the city much, but we went to like Stanley Park, and yeah, very nice. Now, your mother-in-law normally lives in New York City, right?
Right, and so that's why I was out near you guys to record in person. Yeah.
So she also could be a guest who is away from home. It would be funny if she was here, like recording with me, and then
right.
Anyway.
Well,
all right.
I'm going down to Los Angeles this weekend, and so I think I'm just gonna go and TP your home while you're away.
Okay. No response to that from
I don't know what to say to that, James. It's gonna get very.
That's actually like a felony in LA. So
yeah, there you go.
I'm gonna stop shuffling papers around on my desk now, proverbially speaking. I don't know if actually there is a proverb about shuffling papers on desks, but we're gonna go ahead and get into this movie. So, like I said, The Miracle Maker. This is a 1999 British-Russian-American, according to Wikipedia, stop-motion animated film directed by Derek Hayes and Stanislav Sokolov. My understanding is it's basically a collaboration between Russian puppeteers and Welsh filmmakers. It stars Ralph Fiennes as Jesus. There's a couple other big actors like Ian Holm as Pilate and David Thewlis as Judas. But so it's a collaboration between 2 animation houses. I don't know how to pronounce this Welsh name. Cartoon Simru in Cardiff and Christmas Films in Moscow. You'd think that the names would be reversed, but they had collaborated on some small screen shorts based on Old Testament stories. And then the director, Derek Hayes, is English. And then they got this bigger screen feature film with more funding to do The Miracle Maker, a feature-length gospel film.
Blessed be the King who comes in the name of the Lord.
Blessed be the King. Blessed be the King. They're singing, Blessed be the King.
We'll need more than singing, because if nothing ever changes...
Praise the Lord. aliens are here!
Something must be done, my lord.
What are we to do? This man performs great miracles. If we let him go on, everyone will believe in him.
He will give false hope to all the poor. They will follow him anywhere. To war.
Pilate will destroy the temple and all that we have.
You know nothing. Nothing at all. Don't you realize that all the might and anger of Caesar can be aimed at one man? At this magician from Nazareth. Let one man die, and all the people will be saved.
Well, Tim, let me ask you. I mean, as a craftsman of the animated figurine, what did you think of the craftings on this film?
You know, maybe one way to get into that is to talk about like this question everyone seems to ask when you do an animated film, because animation is so painstaking and maybe just painful as a way to make a film. That so why is it animated? So and a lot of times the answer is because it's talking animals, or because we're going inside the mind of a kid, or whatever. And this is a movie where I think the answer is they've created this really big world within the world of stop motion. Like, there are a lot of crowd scenes, there are a lot of characters, nice kind of vistas where you feel it's kind of surprisingly immersive, and I'm sure it is one of the only ways you can make as immersive a portrayal of another time without spending lots and lots of money. So I was really impressed with the production value of the film and just like the feeling of being there. Especially, I mean, it's not just the production value either. Like, the filmmaking itself spends time on little moments of everyday life, like a little boy grabbing a rooster on the road. And those kind of things surprise me, because when you're dealing with animation, everything that's in there was a deliberate choice. They never capture anything. Everything has to be, if it felt like it was captured, it was like domesticated and then put on screen to be captured. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And one of the things we're always trying to create the illusion of is spontaneity. And this movie had a lot of that in a good way. Lots of ways to talk about that, but I guess let me just say one thing that I was really impressed with was the certain characters had really great performances in terms of their physical movement. And I think Mary Magdalene was a standout for me. I thought that was amazingly well done. And I also loved King Herod. He had this sort of like, I don't know, just like snaky, kind of slithery kind of movement, especially in his neck. And, I guess we've all seen our fair share of Bible cartoons and my own film, The Star, and then also do you remember those old Hanna-Barbera things about like they touch the thing and they fall down the quicksand and they end up in the Bible times. Do you remember this?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, I wish I could remember it better, because it's kind of a meme, because they've got like, there's a man, a woman, and their like Indian friend Achu or something, and it's just like this total like 80s thing. But anyway,
the only religious cartoons I really remember growing up with were those CCC things, with like Saint Stories,
Fatima and Lords and all that. Yeah,
I remember the Ben-Hur one. There was a Ben-Hur version, on CCC. That was the one
I know that you used to watch those because I've listened to the episode where you talked about that.
Right.
I'm stalking you. But I guess the point I was going to make is that a lot of that stuff, the animation feels a little bare bones, like kind of in the world of Scooby-Doo, basically, where it's like they're not really, they're animating so that you believe that character is talking, but they're not really thinking of it as a performance. And one of the virtues of stop motion is that there is no shorthand. There are no ways to do like really limited stop motion. You're always just going to be there taking one frame at a time. And what that means is that the animator is there in real time in some sense. Whereas in other keyframe animation techniques, you can kind of, put a keyframe here and then jump ahead 2 seconds and put another keyframe there, and then either the computer or the in-betweener or whatever kind of fills in the blank. In stop motion, there is no in-betweening. Every frame is every frame. Every frame has to be captured individually. And what that means in practice is that you are living in the performance. That this 5 second little monologue, this 5 second little line that the character has becomes a monologue, and you think about when's he going to blink, when's he going to kind of like turn his head and all that stuff. And so, all to say, I think this movie has really good animated performances, and I don't think it's an accident that came from a stop motion film.
Yeah, well, it's worth noting too that stop motion is just one of the 2, maybe even 3 animating techniques that are employed in this film, because the other main one is these, what we would associate as being more conventional 2D cartoonish animation. I don't know what sort of specific kind of animation that is, but then there's also some digital animation with certain effects with water, for instance, but those are very minimal. But this other animating style is very prominently featured in segments like flashbacks, memories. Some of the parables are animated in this way. Jesus' temptation in the desert, sort of like anytime we step into this, I don't know, it's
psychological.
Like, right. It's like more psychological. It's not in the present moment. It's
certain supernatural things, also certain like intense psychological things. Like it's hard to pin down exactly what the principle, like uniting all these different uses of the thing is, but they even do it for instance, showing parts of Judas's betrayal of Christ,
right?
And that's not a supernatural.
Great Annis described it as objective versus subjective reference or point of view, so that when it shifts into this painted animated style, it's articulating a subjective experience as opposed to something that's happening like objectively in real time in the world. And one of the interesting things that he pointed out was that this enabled the filmmakers to articulate the historicity of Jesus's resurrection in an artistic way by setting that within the sort of objective reference of the stop motion. So I thought that was really well observed on his part.
Yeah, I was going to say it's important to note that, if you look at it in terms of subjective, it's important to know that not all of the supernatural occurrences are being shown in the 2D style.
Right.
I think it really has to do with psychological. Well, I mean, sure, subjective is probably the right word too, but like, a memory is rendered that way when Our Lady is remembering Jesus being lost in the temple. And there's nothing supernatural exactly that's happening there, but we're doing it through her mind, through her first person POV.
Yes.
But another thing that I noticed about that is that it allows the film to transcend the limitations of some of the puppet stuff that they're dealing with. And I actually think it's very well animated, as I mentioned, but at the same time, the characters are basically, the facial animation seems to be mostly limited to the mouths and I suppose the eyebrows too, a little bit, maybe the eyebrows, but maybe even the eyebrows aren't animating much. For instance, Peter, he's kind of seems like kind of frozen in this like indignant sort of face, which is actually great for defining the character. And there are actors who kind of have like a resting whatever face, like surprised face or resting. And so it kind of works. It's like a certain casting approach. But like when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's pleading with God the Father, the face can contort into grimaces that the puppet is actually not capable of. So you just see like those lower teeth and everything. Those are things that the puppet was not going to be able to do because it's so contained within the mustache and beard. So I guess that's another. If I were the filmmaker, that was another reason that I would have gone into 2D. If you're going to go to some extremes of emotional expression that the puppet is not capable of doing, it's a good reason to go to 2D.
Right. Yeah. And I didn't even know that there was going to be this 2D animation before I watched the film. So that was kind of like a cool surprise. I think it starts if I'm remembering correctly, it starts when you see Jesus being tempted in the desert, or maybe with Mary's flashback.
I think
to
it's
the
Mary's
temple.
Mary's flashback.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
But one of the interesting things that happens with his temptation in the desert is like it starts out almost like an overlay of the 2D
Right.
on the stop motion. So there's like this almost like psychedelic feeling at first before it transfers
Right.
entirely to the 2D.
Right.
So there's a lot of cool effects that are achieved in that way. And I wanted to say also, this film, it was interesting to watch this film after we've spent, discussed 3 seasons of The Chosen,
Right.
over the past couple of
Right.
years.
Right.
And we've talked about the pros and cons of expanding the gospel accounts, which are usually kind of terse, and compact. And I kind of feel like this film gets the best of both worlds in so many ways, because it does expand on things and add little details, but not in a way that it feels like they're taking a ton of poetic license for the most part. And it still maintains that compact power of the gospel stories. I mean, this film is clocking in at 88 minutes. It's just under an hour and a half. It gets a lot in, kind of going from the baptism of Jesus with a couple of flashbacks to like the nativity and the finding of Jesus in the temple, things like that, on through the resurrection. I would say my only complaint is I think the passion was too compact. I think they could have done a little more with that, but overall this film covers an amazing amount with plenty of emotional impact. Yeah. And if I can just say, like, I could see this film becoming a regular family viewing in a way that I wouldn't want to do with The Chosen. I think you were talking about why is it animated, and it also struck me that this is not iconographic in style, but it is iconographic in the sense that this animation allows us to. It can be realistic in some ways without being like straight up like cinematic realism, it just allows you to do these compact gospel scenes in a way I can't describe it because I'm.
Is it kind of like you don't have to. You give the film a little bit more leeway to do its own thing because it's animated, and so it's at some level a bit of an abstraction or something and so you don't feel as offended if it goes astray.
I think it's that actually my imagination is engaged in a way that it's not when I'm watching a live action film. Not to say that my imagination isn't engaged at all, but the degree to which it is engaged is much, 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 much like lower than it is when I'm dealing with animation. Particularly stop motion, because stop motion sort of gets at the puppetry aspect of animation a lot more explicitly. These are puppets that are being manipulated. And with a puppet, I, as the viewer, have to project onto it. I have to imbue it with significance. Even though that's made easier by the artistry of the puppeteer, at the end of the day, I'm still very aware that this is an inanimate object. And so I have to, more than just suspend disbelief, I also have to like buy in and sort of, impose onto this thing.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. I much more so than I would in a live action performance. Now, I'm not saying that this dynamic doesn't occur in whatever cinema you're viewing. I think it does. And I think that probably cinema and actors' performances are strongest when they can begin to leverage that kind of a dynamic. But it's never going to be as pure as it is with puppetry. I think that puppets are unique in their ability to sort of draw this out of us, such that we can actually find ourselves being more struck by an image of the crucifixion happening to a puppet than happening to, an actor on screen with, whatever sorts of special effects and whatever else. I think that's like, if I were to ask the question, like, why animate this? I think that's a big answer is, well, this narrative, this gospel narrative is too big to be contained by a live action depiction. And I think that this is a legitimate criticism that can be levied at a project like The Chosen, despite the fact that I really like it, but the more I've been watching it, and we've talked about this on the show, I'm beginning to have these doubts about the project of a live action depiction of the gospel in this way. But puppetry can like take all of that without reducing it or losing. It's not going to be like a perfect vessel, but I think that it's amazing how so many things in this film struck me in a way that was unexpected. One that comes to mind right now is the conversion of Matthew. Happens so quickly, so simply done. I mean, it's just presented really as it's presented in the gospel, as kind of matter of fact, kind of just come follow me, and he does. And in a live action portrayal, that's probably a hard sell, because you really have to find a way, to convey the gravity of this to the audience, the believability or whatever. Because the suspension of disbelief, you don't want people to have to really deal with that when you're watching a naturalistic live action film. But for whatever reason, in this film, I totally bought it. Without them having to do like a ton of backstory or work to like really get me there. There was like a shot of Matthew in an earlier parable, looking kind of guilty and dejected. But the puppet is able to like communicate this like very sort of directly and very simply, and I think it has a lot to do with my involvement as a viewer. Yeah.
Well, I really like when the animation where he like drops his bag on the table and just like sweeps the whole table with his arm. It's like you really feel like the physical weight of that moment.
That's
nice.
the way. I mean, that's a very animated way to show the moment, as you're saying, James. Like I think a lot of times we in animation try to. It's not really reducing, but I'll maybe use the word reduce. We try to reduce a thought to like an iconic representation of it, something that captures that idea, and like dropping the money bag and sweeping it off the table. Maybe it would read as a little bit too big and theatrical in a live action film, but it captures what we're talking. It's a physicalization of the thought that's happening, and that kind of thing tends to really work in animation much better actually than the right kind of eye flick and the right kind of catch on the throat.
Right.
Like, that's to forget that stuff in animation. We want something that physicalizes the internal. In animation.
Yeah. Well, and it's a poetic synthesis of something. It's reducing in the same way that poetry reduces to like something like really core.
I guess distill is the complementary word, right? Yeah, we're distilling. So I would love to kind of grab a few of the ideas you guys were just throwing out. One is totally want to echo, Thomas, your thing of like this should be regular viewing. So if people listening have not seen it, you should see it and show your kids for sure. I personally would give it my full endorsement. I think it was wonderful. So I highly recommend.
And this was your first viewing, right?
That's my first viewing.
For all of us, I think. Yeah.
I've heard about it for like 15 years. Actually, people have been telling me to see it, and especially from people who've recommended it to me, I've heard admiration for the portrayal of the apostles. And I agree with that, but I'm also surprised now seeing it how little screen time they get, but every bit of screen time they get is really well done. Now, the thing I found interesting watching it is like one of the tricks with doing a biblical movie is that everyone who's watching knows the story. So there is no suspense in that sense. Everyone knows where it's going. So what is at a granular level, what is keeping them watching? And the thing that I kind of looked at myself a little bit as I was watching the movie, and it was interesting to see the delight that I was getting just minute by minute going through this movie was how are they going to introduce this new thing? Because they found really delightful, surprising ways to introduce characters. Like, here comes a crazy woman, da-da-da-da, and then someone says it's Mad Mary. And then in your head, you're like, Mary, Jesus is going to, he exorcised her of 7 demons, and so it's like, oh, we're meeting her before that. And then also we're meeting this tax collector that everyone's slagging off and everyone hates him. And it's like, I wonder if this is going to be Matthew. And then we meet Judas in a cave hanging out with his friends. And it's just this guy who's being called Judas, but he hasn't been called by Jesus yet. But it's like, I know where this is going. So it was kind of, I think the main thing we're enjoying is seeing these really natural cinematic ways that gospel elements are being connected. And I think that's also how they are able to cover so much good ground in this movie, because they'll take anonymous moments in the gospel, like the paralytic being lowered through the ceiling, and they're like, okay, it's Peter's house. We're going to do this in Peter's house. Now Peter gets to be the guy complaining. And I think it's also how we, in that very compressed amount of time, we feel like we get to know these characters because they don't waste any time on non-ensemble members,
Right.
Like there's no extras in the movie. Everyone turns out to be part of the movie, which I think probably is also a piece of doing it in stop motion because they needed a puppet for that person, so we better use it a few times,
Totally. And it's funny because in this context, it feels like less of a transgression than it does when it's in a live action context like The Chosen, where all of the characters are connected and there is this sense of like there is no extras, like, oh, okay, we're gonna like, turn this ancillary character into this moment or whatever. It has, I think, in my opinion, the opposite effect of like kind of shrinking the world and making it feel more contrived. But in a puppetry context, in the context of an 88-minute stop motion film that's like, summarizing the whole gospel, it totally works, and actually, I think that this is maybe the strongest aspect of the film. I don't know that enough about this has been said, is how it distills the gospel into 88 minutes. I think that it
doesn't feel like a collection of vignettes,
right,
which is very impressive. It's like very smoothly connected together.
Totally. And it's a tall order. And of course, you could talk all day about, oh man, really would have been nice if they had added this, or really nice that they would have added that. But as I was watching this, I just very quickly felt like, wow, they're really, I how do I put this? I really felt like it was getting at the essence of things. Like, there's only a couple of parables that are included. What if you had to include, one or two parables out of all the parables that are contained in the Gospels? Which ones do you include? That's a pretty difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
And yet, this film, in the editorial choices that it's making, manages to somehow retain this like essential quality, such that I didn't really feel anything missing, except in the sense of like missing a friend at a party or something. Like, man, it would have been great if they were there. But I
think the one interesting, I agree with that feeling that like a lot of Jesus's teachings and words are left out of the movie by necessity because there's not enough time. But I think it kind of makes an interesting, like, larger point, which is that, sort of against the sort of Thomas Jefferson approach to the Bible of Jesus as teacher. It's like, the teachings are important, but not the most important thing about the Gospels is the figure of Jesus and his life and his relationships to people.
And the miracle maker, right? Right. Like that's the opposite of the Jeffersonian Bible.
Yeah.
Right. But even there, they're leaving a lot of miracles out too. I figured we'd see, as I was watching, I thought, well, if you're going to call it the miracle maker, I assume we're going to see the feeding of the 5,000. Because that seems like the most epic miracle that he worked, but it wasn't in the movie, and that's fine again, because I think what we're really seeing is like this is a God-made man living amongst men and dying for them, and and so it captured the most important thing, which is Christ is the center of the Gospels, not Christ's teaching.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it does this so artfully and so economically far outweighs any kind of criticism that could be levied at it about like, oh, well, if only this had been included or a little more time spent with this. It's like, dude, this is just so remarkable that it was done successfully at all.
Yeah. So my only complaint really is I felt the passion could have been expanded a little bit more because we only get like 2 of Jesus's 7 last words on the cross. It just feels like very quick. And also Mary at the foot of the cross. It's like the first time I saw the film, I didn't even think she was there.
Yeah. But I wonder
just,
if you look at it, like how long is the passion sequence? It's probably already more than a third of the film.
No.
It's really short, man.
It's
much
If
shorter.
you're including from like Gethsemane through to the crucifixion,
like the trials and like meeting Pilate.
Yeah. What feel was too short was basically from the carrying of the cross on.
Oh, I see.
I wish that if we had just gotten a couple more of Jesus's last words, or the dividing of the garment, just something to flesh it out a little bit more. It wasn't as egregious as the gospel according to St. Matthew's passion sequence, which is like so diminished. By the way, I'm just going to say this movie is way better than Pasolini's gospel according to Matthew.
Yes.
As a gospel adaptation.
Yes.
I had the same reaction to the passion sequence that that was short, but then I thought, I wonder if it's just because I'm so used to the Passion of the Christ and like I expect this to be 2 hours of bloody realism and stuff, and it's just like it's over. But I think it, for that reason, it's probably better, for instance, for kids that are my kids' age, because it's like they know Jesus died on the cross. They know he got nailed. They know there was blood, but it's not. I think this is it's a great laying of the foundation for all of it. And yes, there should have been more. I have my one criticism is not a criticism about kind of what was left out, but sort of a criticism from the point of view of the filmmaking. And I only can even levy this criticism because I think the movie was so good that it, to me, signaled that it was reaching for something that then it just didn't do anything with. And that is, the movie's called The Miracle Maker. And when we kind of first meet Jesus, he's teaching people, he's talking to people, he's doing parables, and yet the movie's called The Miracle Maker. Jesus talking about, I want to build the kingdom of God here, and that's that's the new thing I'm building. I'm doing God's work, I'm building. And it feels like in the first few times you see him, he's trying to do this by teaching, but then some woman says, Israel has enough teachers. And there's it felt like there would be some moment, I thought, this is where the movie's going, and it's brilliant. There's some moment when Jesus realizes they don't need teaching. Teaching's not the only thing they need. That's not the only thing I need to be giving them. I need to be showing them the power of God in their lives. And that's when the miracles start happening. And the miracles do kind of start happening, but there was I just thought the movie indicated that it was going to be moving towards the key decision for Jesus was, I'm going to reveal the power of God through miracles.
Well, there's no wedding at Cana.
Right. Yeah, so there's no wedding in Cana. The first miracle we see, do you guys remember which one it is?
No, I don't remember which one it is.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, that's a fault of the movie, of a very, very good movie. But it's like, I feel like, especially because the movie does a good job actually getting us into the interiority of Jesus and his intention and what he's trying to do, that decision to I'm going to do this, I feel like that deserves something.
Yeah, sure.
I do think the title feels to me like an afterthought. Like, it doesn't feel like you're going to learn that much about the movie from the title.
Right. Gradanis, in one of his write-ups about the film, indicated that he felt it was a missed opportunity not to show the transfiguration. And I really agree with that, because with that silent film on the life and passion of Christ that we watched earlier in this podcast, that's on the Vatican film list. One of the best parts of that is it the Ascension? When they didn't do, I don't think they did the transfiguration, but they did the Ascension. But the Ascension, and it's like there's choirs of angels, and it's really
that was cool.
It's super cool, and you can only imagine like what could have been expressed, with this animated style. Maybe with the superimposition of the 2D animation working together with the stop motion, to generate some sort of really psychedelic transcendental transfiguration thing,
Grant Dennis said that very few films have dared to show the transfiguration. Even I was listening to an interview with the creator of The Chosen, and he was saying like he didn't even he had to be like, he almost didn't do the walking on the water sequence because he was like afraid to try it. And then like he was saying, I still don't want to do the transfiguration. Jonathan was like, no, you got to do it, man. He was like convinced that it just wouldn't work,
Yeah, right.
Well, what that brings to mind, I remember in college taking a course on like children's literature and fairy tales, and one of the works we read pointed out that a lot of times the beautiful princess is not described physically, but instead you hear that as she walks past, the flowers open up and the birds
Totally.
sing. And so maybe, I mean, we'll see what happens, but like maybe if I were to try it as a filmmaker, I would try focusing on the effects of the transfiguration and maybe show less of the vision itself, you know?
Nice. Yeah.
Hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, well, we don't even get. I don't think we see the ascension in this film. We see like right after.
Yeah, it's sort of
because the words from the words of Jesus before his ascension are repeated by one of the characters.
But it's just a dissolve to white, and then he's gone. And my kids were watching with me at that point, and they said, "What? Where did he go?" And I said, "Well, he went up to heaven," but we don't see it in the movie.
Yeah. If I can just clarify really quickly, my complaint about the Passion, it's not that I think on the physical suffering side of it, I think it was appropriate for what this film is. That was fine. It's more like some of the like incidents
Yeah.
that I was missing, like the two thieves or
Right.
Jesus forgiving his
especially because of
persecutors,
what has
those
been
kinds of things.
set up. Like, you know, we understand Jesus lives with his mother. There's a setup there that just never had a payoff, and other things like that. Where again, if you can just take the movie for what the movie is, there are certain promises it's implying that it's going to do. But again, the movie's great. How can it fulfill all those promises? But like, you do kind of miss some of them.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any like favorite of the 2D animated moments?
Definitely when Jesus exercises Mad Mary. I mean,
Yeah,
like
that was great.
that it's scary, you know, like that. And I'm a big fan of scaring little children. I think that this is something that has largely been forgotten by our like cultural consciousness, and it needs to be reclaimed. I just think that children need to be scared from like an earlier age. This is a scary world that we live in, you know? And so finding ways to do that, you know, I think that Disney films, older Disney films excelled at this.
I found Bambi pretty scary when I was a kid, like the whole woods at night.
Totally.
scene.
And we talked about this with Fantasia. You know, like that's a huge part of my childhood is hiding from the Death Mountain or whatever it's called sequence.
Death Mountain.
Yeah. But yeah, that sequence was amazing, you know, like totally chilling.
Yeah, I think my favorite probably was the second one when Jesus is being tempted in the desert. Because I wish I could remember specifically the thought that entered my head, but I remember as I was watching it, I was like, I never thought of it that way, or I had never seen it quite this way before.
I know what you're talking about because I had the same thought, but I can't remember what it was connected to. What's the second temptation?
It's popularity, basically. It's like, you know, all the people saying, "Oh,"
right.
And then the third one is, "Oh, right." I mean,
well, cast yourself down, and the idea is that like the people would see it, and
and they'd be like, "Oh,
he's the son of God.
Messiah."
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yes.
And it's also cool.
Also interesting, Satan is depicted wearing a toga.
Right.
He looks like a Roman.
Well, that connected to, I was surprised to see Herod looks just straight up Roman, but with a more olive complexion. But that's, I remember reading somewhere, someone was saying, and maybe this is Gray Dennis's take, but I think I only read the Wikipedia, I haven't read his stuff, but someone is saying this movie captures more than most movies of the conflict between kind of the Jewish culture and the Roman, you know, occupying culture. And putting Herod in Roman dress with no beard totally captures this idea that he's like the client ruler of the Roman Empire. He's not one of them.
Right.
Yeah, I thought the stuff with the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin and stuff was handled really well. It didn't feel like it was being toned down, but nor did it feel like edgy.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
I mean, I'm not one who like worries about how are they going to handle the Jewish persecution of Jesus, like, you know, a lot of people do, but it felt like it was handled in like just a very straightforward way. Like the scene with Caiaphas, like it's good for one man to die that the people may be saved, and you know those scenes were handled well. But back to the 2D animation, I really liked the parables, especially the big parable sequence when it what is it, the building your house on sand versus building your house on the solid rock, and that was just like very entertaining.
Right.
You got the sense of like how the people would be reacting and like laughing at some of the things in Jesus's parables, and like kind of like, you know, but when it switches to this animation with like an actual border, like an actual frame around it, it reminded me, this kind of a random movie that I haven't thought of since I saw it in the theaters, but like it's one of the last Harry Potter movies, one of like Deathly Hallows Part 1 or 2, which I haven't seen, I think, since it was in the theaters, but there's this moment where they do something which had never been done in any of the movies before,
Right.
which is, I think, when they're telling the story of the Deathly Hallows, they actually switch to animation. I just remembered when I was thinking about this parable sequence that it had like a similar like jolting effect of like, oh, this is a really cool way to do this.
Yeah.
It gets my attention.
It almost emphasizes that you are being instructed right now. It plays out like an instructional video. And
totally.
Isn't there kind of a split screen thing where the screen? Yeah.
Yes.
You
yeah.
got the guy building his house on stone and the guy building his house on sand.
So it's nice
great.
because the animation is really, it's serving a pedagogical function. It's really reinforcing the fact that this is a teaching, and it's sort of,
imagine if we had seen like a live action thing and it cuts to like the events that are described in this parable in like a live action way, and it's like we're showing this in a realistic way. It really emphasizes like the didactic nature of what Jesus is doing here.
Those parables, I think, were. Well, maybe that parable specifically was probably my least favorite part of the film because the scripting of it, I think, kind of over-explains the parable and reduces its meaning to sort of like this one-dimensional, this is what this parable is about. And I think the power of
because
parables,
Jesus explains the parable a little bit?
The power of the parables is that there's so many ways to approach it. And like I remember hearing it like, yeah, I guess that's what that parable is about. But it's about so much more,
Yes. No, I agree with you on that aspect. And the other parable that I remember that it animates much more briefly is when he's in the, I think is when he's in the house before the guy's about to be healed, let down through the roof. He's doing the parable of like the plank in your eye.
Yeah. I laughed out loud watching that one.
That was great because first of all, again, like I was saying, you get the people reacting and like laughing at the parable, and the way that it's delivered by Ralph Fiennes is great. But the depiction of it, like I'd never thought about that. I thought about it always as like this sort of like the camel going through the eye of the needle. Like this guy literally has a plank in an eye, but they show you the image of the guy like holding a big like stack of wood in front of his face while like lecturing and then somebody else and then like tripping. It's just like it was very cool.
Yeah. While we're on the subject, one more cool animated image is whenever Judas is imagining this militaristic Messiah. And so we see Jesus in armor, like commanding forces and
yes.
Yeah,
totally.
That's super awesome. There's a sequence in the animated Return of the King from the 80s or 70s where he does the Samwise the Strong fantasy, and he imagines himself being, if he took the ring, he could lead. It reminds me of that. So like Jesus, it's sort of like hardcore Jesus. I mean, Jesus is hardcore, but it's like, what if Jesus, with the flames underneath him, wielding the sword, and it's like, and it's such a great way to capture it. This is why Jesus is falling so short for Judas. It's like, what are you doing? Like, it was.
Yeah. And what
so
if you
awesome
what if you did that? What if you did that live action? Like the effect would be very different because in this animation, you can have it clearly be this is a figment of the guy's imagination. And you can show the kind of like absurdity of it at the same time as like the power that this imagination has. Again, these things tend to be reduced in a live action context, I think.
Yeah. And one thing that it did for me was it really highlighted the love in Jesus's mission to come and die for us and not to come and exterminate us. That like Jesus would have been justified to lead an army against whomever, but that this is not the approach that he takes. So
if I can say just for the audience, like the idea is that Judas is friends with Barabbas and he's part of this like rebel group, and that's his hopes for Jesus.
Now, the movie doesn't go there again because of the limitations of the running time, but one of the nice things about watching this movie is that there's so much fruit for contemplation later. And the thing that I started to be, because I've imagined, what if I made a movie about the apostles, and what would I do? As I read the Gospels, it's kind of how I approach it, to just get in there and imagine who are these characters, what are the evidences we get. And we know one of the apostles is Simon the Zealot. And this storyline that the movie gives to Judas is always the storyline that I gave to Simon the Zealot. Like, this is the guy who is a zealot. Right. My understanding is that he's like a revolutionary, wants to see, sort of kingdom of God interpreted politically. And And what's great is like imagining Judas. What if Judas and Simon had the same dream and would take the movie's interpretation that this is why Judas betrays Jesus, because Jesus is falling short of that dream. But there's something very beautiful then to imagine someone else in that crowd having the same dreams and then transcending them. You know,
Right.
It's just it's kind of cool to imagine Simon the Zealot. I want to see Jesus, the kind of angry general, vengeful. And then being humbled and seeing like God is very different from the person I want him to be, but he's better, and I need to realize that don't do what I want to do. Your will be done, Lord.
Yeah. Right. And it's interesting, I think you could imagine that a number of the apostles had this dream to one extent or another. And this movie nods to that with like Judas kind of like influencing them in some of their discussions, but yeah, it's cool that like, you see him getting like increasingly frustrated, even at the moment when they're going to Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and Judas is like just like disgusted by this like crowd of like peasants with their palms and stuff. He's like, this isn't good enough,
Right. He's like, doesn't he imagine them holding swords instead of palms? He's imagine what we could be doing with this.
And his like disappointment and like frustration and like feeling lost, and then also too when he decides to go and betray Jesus, one of the last things he hears, he's sort of like sticking his head into the courtyard where Jesus is preaching, and Jesus is like, the Son of Man has come to give his life. And like, that's like the last straw for Judas. Like you were saying, Tim, that this contrast is really well expressed. If I can just really quick, just point back to one more subtle moment of animation that I really appreciated it. So early on in the film, we get Mary's flashback to Jesus being found in the temple by Mary and Joseph. But then there's this callback to it later. So when Jesus comes into the temple shortly before the Passover, we get him like remembering his first visit to the temple as a boy. And he's coming in and it's this like idyllic thing. And then it like switches back to the stop motion, and suddenly there's all the merchants and the money changers in the temple. And I thought it's not like a very flashy animation moment, but I just thought that transition where we make that connection of like Jesus, how important the temple was to him and how he loved the temple,
right. He's
was really
comparing
well
that childhood
done.
Memory. And that's, I think, the main pleasure of this movie is it does such a great job connecting dots that you probably have not connected before. It reminds me of, I remember reading, this is not in the movie, so I guess I'm going a little afield, but I love this so much, I'll share it. Somewhere I was reading that when Peter betrays Jesus, we read that it's around the fire. So there's the smell of charcoal and the smell of smoke as he's betraying Jesus. And later when Jesus tells him, do you love me? Feed my sheep. That's in front of a fire. And so that smell of charcoal is in Peter's nose, both in the moment they betrayed and in the moment when Jesus allows him to kind of apologize and redeem himself. Both times it's around a fire, and it's just kind of cool to see those. And I think the movie does that very well.
Right.
There's another thing that like this sort of collapsed, like there are no extras, if that's what we can call that quality of this movie. The fact that there are no extras, everything that every anonymous person in the gospel turns out to have been one of the characters that's gonna be important later. Early on, we sort of meet a tax collector who's just a tax collector, but he's there to show us the attitude of people towards tax collectors. That's going to be important because we're going to see Jesus accepting those tax collectors. Well, by making that person Matthew, they're being very efficient from a filmmaking and puppet standpoint, but also, again, had never occurred to me, but when Jesus selects Matthew to be one of the apostles, they're like, this guy, the apostles, this is the guy that it has been established. We hate this guy. And even down to the character design, all the other apostles are young, kind of good looking guys. And Matthew's this like old middle-aged guy with a big nose, a bald head, just kind of like bad posture. But he manfully accepts the, like you say, he stands up vigorously and accepts it. And it's just so cool to imagine like, what if like, when you get a group of 12 guys together, there's going to be someone in last place, someone that no one likes. It's kind of cool to imagine like Matthew, this thoughtful middle-aged guy who's going to go on to write the first gospel. He's the guy that everyone kind of hated,
Right. We should probably point out this, like the through line of the movie. One of the bits of like poetic license is the little girl that Jesus is, Jairus' daughter, who he raises from the dead. She's kind of like the observer character throughout the whole movie from the very beginning. And she even speaks the last words of the film about the kingdom of heaven. So I don't know that we need to talk about it that much. It worked. I thought it worked pretty well,
Yeah.
you know, as a device.
Yeah. Well, and also I think because it worked in concert with the teaching that if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to first turn and become like this little child. He's not indicating Tamar, who is Jairus's daughter, is given a name in this film. He's not indicating her in this moment, but we can see that she like receives that teaching along with the apostles, and we can sort of
she's the first to recognize him at before the breaking of bread,
right,
with the disciples at Emmaus, and
we can begin to speculate about who is approaching this ideal of being childlike better, and it's probably Tamar, you know, and so it also disposes us to receive these things in the same way. This is one of the ways that I think that the film does a really good job of cutting to the core. You know, we get the instruction to build your house on solid rock. We get the instruction to become like a little child. You know, these are foundational, essential teachings, you know.
What I was going to say is, what's the word that he uses? Did he say you must change utterly?
Yeah,
or something like that. I just like some of the things were like paraphrased in a way that, you know, I liked or didn't like in terms of the actual text of the gospel, but I particularly liked that whatever translation that they used there, it like really hit home.
Yeah, totally.
There's just another kind of connecting the dots moment that I liked, which again, in the Gospels we know, Mary Magdalene, from whom he cast out 7 demons, is then later the one who announces the the resurrection. In all the other movies of this, it's always been like, so Mary Magdalene, who was she was a friend, they all knew her, she hung out. But in this movie, she's crazy. She's Mad Mary, wandering the streets, like probably sleeping on the streets, throwing money around and everything. And then even after he dispels the demons, she's weird, and she like doesn't talk, and she's sort of like slinks out of there with, people try to grab her and get rid of her, but she like kind of goes away wordlessly, and she's weird like the whole time. And it first of all makes the idea that like she would have been one of the people closest to him at the resurrection very moving, because like what if Mary had some kind of intellectual disability? That's kind of interesting. It seems like that devotion that adds a layer of meaning to the devotion to our Lord that I had never thought of. But then later, the idea that she's the one who comes back and says, he's back.
And she's out of breath, and like she's like out of breath, and it almost feels like how she was acting at the beginning
like,
of the movie.
I saw him, and they're like, Mary's gone crazy again. Like, you totally get how that would, there's like a total bias that goes on that because she's that person with the 70, and then this movie unlocked that for me. So
I thought that was a good performance of being out of breath, like the way she was, whatever the actress was reading those lines. I was convinced. But if I can just point to one other moment that I liked was, so Jairus is depicted as being the friend of the companion of Cleopas, that they're the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, and Cleopas is his friend throughout the movie. But there's a really moving scene where Jesus is on his way into the garden after the Last Supper, and they like ask him to like stop with them at their fire and talk to them because they have questions about things. And just like the way that Jesus is clearly, he's already beginning to like suffer psychologically, and he kind of is like, I'll talk to you later. I don't know. I just thought that was like a very moving.
Right. Well, yeah, turning
moment.
the visit on the road to Emmaus, turning that into a payoff to a setup. Right now, it just in the gospel, it just kind of sits there. But like, so why did he appear to them? Well, maybe he promised he would, and so that's why they get their little special visit.
Right. We haven't talked about the acting really at all. The voice acting. Ralph Fiennes as Jesus. I think he strikes a nice balance. Like I've listened to a number of different audio Bibles, and the voice acting of Jesus is always really lame. Like it's just like really wimpy sounding.
Yeah.
And like when he is getting intense, you like don't really believe it.
Sure.
But like, Ralph Fiennes, we just talked about him in Schindler's List as the evil Nazi. I don't know. He has a good voice that can kind of like do both.
It's rich.
He can kind of be gentle.
It's not nasal like my voice. It's like a real, it's manly,
It's not like a wimpy American
Yeah.
nice guy.
Yeah, and he's not like affecting some kind of idea of holiness, by like
Right.
talking very softly or something, and there's a lot of range, so that when he's cracking a joke or being light with the disciples, or when he's flipping out in the temple, or the garden in Gethsemane, at the agony in the garden is like super heightened.
Yes.
He's really
Right.
really
It's not
crying
just like,
out.
Lord, take this cup away from me. He's like
Right.
really demanding.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I made a note of a moment that I loved too, which is that when they gather in the fish at the miraculous catch of fish, which maybe that's the first miracle in the movie.
Yeah.
And again, I just would have loved to see Jesus like decide this is the one.
Sure.
Right.
But in any case,
Right.
when they pull those fish in, Jesus is laughing with delight. I think both laughing at like Peter's astonishment, but then also just laughing because like if you've got to pull in like 300 fish, there's something kind of overwhelming about that.
Yeah.
Very beautiful human moment.
Totally. I thought so too.
Yeah. I thought it was a really solid, well-rounded performance. That like I didn't feel like it was really kind of letting an aspect of Christ's.
Right. Like way better
Emotional
than the
life passed
Pasolini
by.
depiction of Jesus, Yeah.
Like
way better than that performance.
Well, and then going beyond Jesus, there was a choice to make at least some of the apostles Scottish or at least Northern English or something, and they've got this real
Peter in
blue
particular.
collar, and it makes. I mean, there's a reference somewhere in the Gospels about the Galileans and the way they talk and their accent and everything, and I've always wondered how would I translate that? Like, would they talk like this, or whatever? But like, you want them to have something, and that Scottish accent hit. It kind of reminds me of the dwarves from Lord of the Rings. There's something really nice about that.
Yeah. The Pharisees have like a pretty posh accent, and then Jesus, I read that he has kind of a Northern English accent, so it's not like super rural sounding, but it still has something of that like slight grit
That like
to
working
it.
class vibe.
Yeah, but not like in this like aggressive like Gimli voice or something.
I think it's a rich film. People, I think you can rewatch it. It's a great foundation for the kids on the gospel.
Definitely.
But then for the adults, these little observations that ping to, if you know the gospels, you're like, yes, that's their take on it, and I love it. So it's a rich experience both for kids and adults. I would say.
Yeah.
I've been saying I wouldn't show The Chosen to my hypothetical kids for various reasons. But this kind of hits, I feel like this movie really hits the sweet spot. It feels like more at one with like the tradition of like, mystery plays and like, it's not Catholic or Orthodox iconographic style, but like this, I think that the spirit of it, is like very much with like, I mean, it's puppets, man. Like you could see this happening in like the Middle Ages, somewhere.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And one last thing I want to say about the film is that I really liked the music. I know that so often we mention music as an afterthought, but like there were just like so many moments where I really appreciated the score. There's like an awesome, is it like a flute or a recorder? It's like a recorder motif that occurs throughout that like kind of somehow jives with the stop motion puppetry. It's like very light,
Right.
and whimsy, but also like appropriate to the period and very evocative. So yeah, liked it a lot.
Well, thank you, Tim, for joining us on this episode.
My pleasure.
So next time we're going to be doing the last Vatican film list film, Napoleon. Which is a 5.5 hour long.
I know. Oh my gosh. I was so happy when I pulled this film up and I was like, 88 minutes. Oh my goodness. This is awesome.
Yeah, we've had some long ones, but this is going to be the longest one. It's actually originally, I think, 7 hours, but we just don't have the whole thing restored. Well, we'll get into it, but yeah. So
we should do a live stream of us watching Napoleon.
It's perfect as a silent
for 5
movie.
hours.
It's perfect for commentary.
Isn't Ridley Scott working on a Napoleon film?
Yeah,
Have you heard
yes.
these
Yes, he
rumors or
is.
something? Okay.
Yes. Speaking of which, I
Sweet.
just watched Aliens. I know he didn't direct that, but James Cameron did. I just watched that for the first time. That was pretty cool.
Nice.
Everybody, thank you for listening. If you're watched on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time.
Criteria is a production of CatholicCulture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Mike Aquilina, Catholic Culture audiobooks, bringing to life classic Catholic writings, and the Catholic Culture Podcast, an interview show exploring Catholic arts, culture, and issues. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical year resources, and much more at CatholicCulture.org.